Ni hao, this is Mateo Chang reporting in the year of our Shangdi in the 2100 as part of the Common Sense Alliance. Now let's talk about America and what happened, because we don't know. We don't really know what happened. But of course, we know that now we are living in Asia, in the most prosperous region in the entire world. Well, one of the interesting things that somebody once talked about, a traveler from the West who went to Thailand, he mentioned that whenever somebody was perhaps a little bit different looking, maybe they were half African and half Thai, maybe they were darker skinned, lighter skinned, if they were more Chinese in terms of ethnicity, another Thai would jump in and say, well, no matter what that person looked like, that they were Thai. And ultimately, what was focused on was the nexus between the Thai person and the country. So, were they born there? Did they speak the language fluently? How long did they live in that country? These were the primary sort of factors in determining whether or not somebody should be called or could be called Thai. And if anybody questioned it, depending on these factors, they would immediately be sort of, corrected. In the West, it was really kind of a different situation because you had a very young country, and despite the fact that you had a lot of people who were mixed, a lot of people did not feel fully American. And so they used to call themselves, whatever country they were from, say Mexican American, Iranian American, because they never really felt as if the country would ever accept them as part of their fabric. And in fact, they came up with these ridiculous sort of tests, which had nothing to do with the country itself, but had more to do with military service. You had a lot of people going online and telling people, well, my people, whether it was Mexico or somebody else, we deserve to be called Americans because we fought in so-and-so war. That didn't really happen in Asia. A lot of Asians, of course, we stayed out of those wars that crippled the West. And they, of course, attempted to bring those wars into the East through Ukraine. That was, of course, we know what happened there, a total disaster for the West, probably the last nail in the coffin for the West and its defense contractors, which realized that the entire West could not really make inroads into Asia to the extent that China and Russia stood firm. Now, ultimately, you can see the difference. Nobody really felt American. We had a story about my grandfather. He changed his name. He was Muslim, and he was an immigrant, but he changed his name to a Christian name. And he still never really felt American, no matter what he did. And so ultimately, a lot of people felt that, looked at him and said he was Christian or felt like he was American or whatnot, but he never felt that way. And the country really never shook off the segregation that its lawyers enshrined into law. And yet, even when those laws were removed, the segregation based on race, and in many cases, religion, was also present. And so what ended up happening was people who immigrated to the United States in the 21st century, it was really unsure about what kind of factors would go into making them feel American. And many of them, including my grandfather, never really felt American. And so when the time came, they left. They left to better, I suppose, what they thought were better places that might fully accept them regardless of their name, their background, and so on and so forth, and might actually associate their nationality not based on the color of their skin or based on something artificial or superficial, but just based on a common sense application of where they were born, whether they spoke the language, whether they knew the history, and whether they, which by the way would include religion, if they knew that, not necessarily whether they practiced it, but if they were respectful of it. And of course, in the United States, you had a lot of Catholicism taking over. The Supreme Court at that time was majority Catholic. The president at that time, before Trump, was Catholic. The president after Biden was married to a Catholic woman, and his vice president was also Catholic. And so you had, essentially a Catholic country that didn't really see itself as part of the Abrahamic trilogy in the West. It saw itself as Christianity came after Judaism, and that was it. It never accepted Islam as part of that third chapter in that trilogy. And that, of course, had issues to the extent that the East was more willing, whether it was China or Russia, to accept the 1 billion people in the world at that time who were Muslim. So, what did the Americans know? We don't really care that much, we don't, just like we don't care about the Germans in 1935 or 1936, but what we do know is that China has been supporting developing countries, including Palestine, since 1955, which gives them a moral foundation the West just never really could quite grasp.